I received a question that I'm really excited about because this person just joined our assembly. And as you know, when we were discerning the dates on God's calendar, we did it together as a body, and each person was confirmed. God confirmed with each person in their own unique and special way that the dates that we had talked about were true. And so this person has asked a question, and a question that introduces something that we hadn't even discussed, like we hadn't even considered this. I don't know why it's so obvious, but see, this person just attended the assembly with us. And so what I feel right now is that she is discerning these dates with us, and God bless her, because she's very thorough. She's really taken the time to seek and pursue what the truth is, and she's questioning me, and I love that. I want you to know that I love that, because the only thing that matters is truth. That's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong. So if you think that I'm wrong about something, then let's discern it together. Let's come to truth. And if I'm wrong, I'll admit that I'm wrong. I'm good with that. I'm not here to save my face. I'm here to save my soul. So she says, Carrie, I really enjoyed the assembly yesterday. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. I'm very interested in how you are determining the dates for the calendar. I agree that there is so much deception, and every time I dive into a calendar study, I get so confused that I end up having to just pick one in order to obey. But the last deep conversation I had with someone about this topic was centered around the fact that we both felt the published calendars all seemed too early, simply based on agricultural markers when crops ripen. So the dates you are suggesting seem extra early to me. I love that. That is so important, because what we've had up until now, and I know everyone in the assembly is going to be so excited about this, what we've had up until now are the new moons. The problem is we could pick one new moon or another new moon, and we need to know exactly when. And so you'll remember, if you listen to the videos when we were discerning this, that as I was sorting through it, I said, God will reveal, like he will reveal to us with specificity. He has his way of doing that. We don't know how, but he was able to establish the moon as the beginning of the marker of the beginning of his month. So he gave us that. And as long as we keep pursuing him and pursuing his heart truly and authentically, he has told us he will give us whatever we want in his name. And that's certainly in his name. He wants us to obey, and he wants us to obey correctly. So she's absolutely right. God's festivals, particularly Pentecost, revolves around these seasons of harvest. And particularly with Pentecost, it's the very beginning. It's that bumper crop of grain. So it's not, if you have a range of when you're supposed to harvest, it's not going to be anywhere within that range. It's going to be at the very beginning of that harvest season, because they were commanded not to eat any of the wheat. They could not eat any wheat until they brought the first sheaf of the wave offering to the priest, and the priest waved it on their behalf. So it's going to be early in the season. We just have to determine when the season is. Now, if you go and you try to understand, well, when is the season? In Israel, for example, like, if you Google that, when is the wheat harvesting season in Israel, it's going to say Sivan 6. Why they would say that, I have no idea, because Pentecost doesn't land on the same day every year. So that's not even with understanding. That sounds like something that came from rabbinical commentary, possibly. There is no static date on the calendar for Pentecost. If you look at Pentecost in the Bible, it's going to be within a range of days, because you're counting off 50 days after the day after the Sabbath, subsequent to Passover. So that can't be that it always lands on Sivan 6. In any event, we're trying to understand when this occurs in correlation, or mostly in correlation, with the Gregorian calendar, because we haven't determined when Sivan 6 even is, if that were the date. That's what we're determining right now. So take a country that is near Israel. They're going to have a similar climate. So I chose Egypt, and I type into Google, when is wheat harvested in Egypt? And Google tells me that it starts at the beginning of April and lasts until the end of August. So then I Google, when is wheat harvested in Palestine? And it says the harvest period starts in mid-April from Jenin, I don't know what that is, and continues until July. So actually, the wheat being harvested in the Middle East is earlier. Now, the ways that we discerned this, and we discerned this actually for, I think it was 3 to 4 weeks. Like, we kept discerning it together because not everyone had received an answer, and we felt that we needed to take more time. And you know what? That's good, because as long as it takes, we're going to endure and we're going to pursue God's truth. And we're going to believe that he will provide truth, because we know that whatever we pray in his name, he will give us. However long it takes, we're going to believe that we're going to receive that. So the first way that we had discerned this is that in 2022, I had an experience where I had been doing this work. God had already told me what it was that I was doing, who I am in the Bible, that I am one of the witnesses, and that this is what he has prepared me for, what he has been preparing me for since 2019. He had already told me that he was going to do something on Pentecost. So at that time, I believed that Pentecost was June 4th because I had been Googling, and that's what it said online. So I was very disappointed on June 4th when nothing happened. I was looking for a tongues of fire experience, and I was very upset. But I did a video weeks before on May 18th talking about something that God was doing with me, and that previously I was preparing what I was going to read or what I was going to speak about on the videos. And on May 18th, he told me, open your mouth and speak. He had been building my repertoire, and now he said, open your mouth and speak. And he has done that ever since. So I knew that that was true. I knew that that was true, and I knew that something had changed. And there were people, you know, who've been listening to the channel since that time, or since the very beginning, who have told me that something changed. Exactly 1 year later, while we were discerning Pentecost and thought that Pentecost was going to be, you know, a little bit down the road, and we had been preparing for Pentecost, it was May 6th of this year. God reminded me of that, had me go and look up that video so that I could understand the date, and he had me counting down from the new moon. Because at that time, it was this year that we discerned that the new moon marked the beginning of his months. Actually, we knew that, but in the process of trying to understand, when do we observe this? Because what we're seeing online is wrong. We had an assembly scheduled for May 7th, and we were going to be observing the second Passover. That's why we had that assembly scheduled. And I ended up showing up to the assembly, and I said, look, guys, God's showing me that today is actually Pentecost. So I spoke with everyone about it, and I said, you can't discern this based on my personal experience, because that's my testimony. You need to have your own. So we all need to discern this as a body. And initially, people kind of went along with what I said, and I was upset about that. I was not happy about that. They basically were just like, yeah, we believe you. But that's not right. That's not correct. And so I had again said, we need to discern this as a body. This is the way that cults start, when you just say, well, I believe you. You can't do that. You have to have your own relationship with God, and you've got to receive it from him. And we took another 3 weeks to discern that. And when we came back, each person had their own experience. Some experiences were very clear, and other experiences were a little bit more subtle, with God confirming it with Scripture. So what I would say to you is, if you are still discerning this, then you need to go discern it with God. You can hear my testimony. You can hear the testimonies of those in the assembly, and you should, but you need to have your own testimony. You need to go and discern that with God and ask him, is this correct? And how much more meaningful will it be? And then you need to believe that whatever you ask for in his name, that it is his will to give it to you, that he desires to give this to you because you are asking in his will, in his purpose, in his cause, so that you can obey correctly. That's what it means to pray in his name. The next thing that she says is, I'm totally open to whatever dates are correct. I listened to your videos on the calendar, but didn't hear you say why you started 2023 on February 19th as opposed to March 21st. Now, just so you know, the reason she's mentioning those dates is because these dates are the new moons. So this really excited me when I was reading this message, because I can see very clearly that this person has been thorough, that they have really tried to pursue the heart of God and tried to pursue truth. One other thing that I want to mention to you is that God's Hebrew calendar is 354 days. The Gregorian calendar is 365. Now, that may not make that big of a difference in 1 year, but it certainly will over time. And so those months are going to get thrown off, aren't they? By 11 days every single year. So to say, well, harvest time occurs at this time, it could be give or take some time. Your months get really wonky when you're messing with God's seasons and his calendar. Days also get wonky. And by the way, the reason we know it's 354 from new moon to new moon, there are 29.5 days. Multiplied by 12 months, that brings you to 354. We know that he has a static 354. If you go and study, Reform Judaism and what they have to say about that, they'll tell you things like, oh, there's a range of days and whatever else. No, they've changed God's calendar, just like the Antichrist has done with everything else. From new moon to new moon, there are 29.5 days. That's it. It's an easy thing to observe. The other issue is a day. And so our days right now, anyway, God has every ability to reveal this to us, but our days are not necessarily a 60-second minute, 60-minute hour, and 24-hour day. May not be that, because God's days are separated by light and darkness. Well, you don't have the same number of hours in a day depending on the season, do you? You have more light during the summer than you do in the winter. And if God sends a plague, or he sends something like he did, he's done in history, I think it was the year 536 is like documented as like the worst year in the world when he removed light. You going to tell me that that's the same number of days and hours and, whatever else? So we have to consider that as well. So when the internet is saying, well, it's somewhere in April, it could also be April to early May or something like that. But it's definitely not going to be later. Okay, so she says, I'm totally open to whatever dates are correct. I listened to your videos on the calendar, but didn't hear you say why you started 2023 on February 19th as opposed to March 21st. Once again, that just seems super early to me. The only biblical references I could find regarding how to determine the first month of the year had to do when certain things were growing. Exodus 9:31 and 10:15. Absolutely right. And also in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, when he's talking about these feast days, he's basing them on the growing season. So you are absolutely correct. And I'm so thrilled that you brought this up. Okay, so we've talked about that. I think we've settled that in terms of what we can settle between the two of us. Now you got to go ask God. Now you got to go discern that with him. Then she goes on to say, regarding the new moon, I agree that we should celebrate that, and I really want to start doing that. However, the only biblical instructions I can find are saying to worship and bring sacrifices on new moon. I can't find any that say it is a Sabbath. Do you have a reference that says it is a Sabbath? Yes, I do. And my daughter is actually the one who brought this up in one of our new moon assemblies. And I just love how God brought this to her attention, because it's not something that is like a direct instruction in Scripture. Like we have direct instructions in Leviticus and Deuteronomy or Numbers, and it talks about this is how you are to observe, this is what you are to do. But listen to this. Amos 8:5. The people had been saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain? Does that tell you that it's a Sabbath? And the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat, skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. So God is rebuking them for not wanting to be still, not wanting to observe that Sabbath rest. So that's how we know. Isn't that cool? I mean, if we weren't coming together as a body, we would not be discerning this together as a body, and we would just lose out on all of this. It's so wonderful to be able to come together, and each person is being, God is revealing something to each person. We're being brought together in unity and in the truth by his Spirit. So it is extremely important for us to be assembling and being used in that way, to be brought together in unity and to be a body, rather than, people just listening to my YouTube channel and you just, you eat from what I give you. But what about your role in the covenant? That you're not in the covenant if that's what you're doing. You need to be showing up. Thank you so much for asking this question or these questions. And I'm so thrilled about your heart. I'm so thrilled that you have really done, obviously, some due diligence to study and to seek the truth. And you really blessed our assembly. You blessed me, and I know you blessed the others in the assembly, because they're going to be so excited when they realize that there's yet again another confirmation from God that what we're doing is correct. One more thing I wanted to add in here is that when God showed me or was leading me to understand what happened on May 18th, 2022, what he did with me, one of the things that he had me do was to look up 354 days, which is his year, 354 days after May 18th, 2022. And that led us right up to May 7th, the exact date that we were meeting in that assembly. Isn't that cool? So it was indeed a year, his year later. But there is one thing that still puzzles me, that I'm still waiting for an answer from him. And I, every time it comes into my mind, I pray about it and ask him to help us to understand. And the thing that puzzles me is that May 18th, 2022 was a Wednesday. So we know that Sunday is the day that Pentecost is observed. Or, we're calling it Sunday. It's not called Sunday in God's word. The first day, which is what the world calls Sunday, we're always going to be observing Pentecost on the day after Sabbath, on that first day of the week. So something's off. Something is off with the days. If in fact this is true, and it is true, because if you count down from the new moon to Passover in that year of 2022, you count from the new moon to Passover to the 15th, then you count those 8 days of Passover. Passover is 8 days. It's not one day. It's 8 days. It's the evening that you're going to be, that first day where you're eating the lamb with bitter herbs and the unleavened bread, and then you eat unleavened bread for another 7 days for the festival of unleavened bread, which is part of the Passover. And then you go from the time that the Passover ends, you go to the Sabbath, and then the day after the Sabbath. And the day after the Sabbath is when you start counting down those 50 days. So you should always land on the day after the Sabbath. So the thing that I'm still trying to understand with him is, why did this end up on a Wednesday? Is it because the days are off? As I explained to you earlier, that the days may be off, what we're dealing with right now, because of that separation from light and darkness. And the other thing is that, 354 days, you don't necessarily have 354 days from one Pentecost to the other, because remember, I told you that Pentecost has that, it's within a range of days. You're not going to have it on, for the example that I used was Sivan 6. It's not going to land on Sivan 6 every year. So that's something that needs to be discerned. I know that God has every ability to reveal this to us. I know what I've received from him, but you have to receive from him. So anyway, that answers, hopefully that answers the question as to how we arrived at this. And then I would say, when we're in Sabbath, feel free, or when we're assembling, feel free to ask others, how did he reveal this to you? Because those testimonies matter. They're important. One other thing that I want to say that occurred to me, because you might notice that the video was kind of choppy where I'm talking about that 354 days, because I misspoke and originally said 360 days, because that's what I thought at one time. But there are 354 days in God's calendar. So there's that 11-day difference. So that's going to throw things off. You're not going to have, if there's 11 days different, and God based his seasons based on his Hebrew calendar, but there was a Gregorian calendar that was introduced that's 11 days off from the growing season. And so every year on, a particular day of the month, you're sowing your garlic or wheat or whatever it is. If you're going based on the Gregorian calendar, you're going to be off. So we can't necessarily say, oh, well, the first wheat is going to pop up in April. It says April to May. So we want to be careful about the tail end of that harvest season, because God commanded the beginning, like the first of the grain. So they wouldn't have eaten any of the grain until they brought the sheaf of the wave offering to the priest, and he waved it to be accepted on their behalf. So we want to go toward the early part of the harvest season. So the other thing that I want to mention is, I want you to think about what's going on in Reform Judaism. What are they doing? Now that you know that new moon is to be a Sabbath, now that you know that it's to be a Sabbath, that you're supposed to engage in Sabbath rest, what's going on in Israel? on their, quote unquote Tishrei, which is not, it's the month of Ethanim. It's not the month of Tishrei. That's a Babylonian name. That should be a warning sign to you. Why are they using the month of Tishrei? The 7th month in God's calendar is called Ethanim. But here's the other thing, is that they have made that into that. What Reform Judaism did is it said there's 2 calendars actually, and that other calendar begins on the 7th month on God's calendar, what they're calling Tishrei, and they've added in a holiday, not a holy day, a holiday called Rosh Hashanah, which they've made to be a new year because, they want to be like the world. That's their new year. And they're observing it as a new year. So they're desecrating God's new moon. That's the very thing he was complaining about, isn't it? These are the people that God was rebuking. People who just make up their own thing. And Christians do it too. It's not an ethnic thing. There's plenty of ethnically Jewish Christians. But see, this is exactly what I was talking about with the person that I spoke with the other day when I was asking him, why are you observing Christmas? And they had an excuse for, observing the birth of Jesus. And I said, well, who told you to do that? The Bible doesn't tell you to do that. And they justified celebrating it. And who cares what we're calling it? Well, I think God does. I mean, I do. The Holy Spirit in me is grieved about it. I can only imagine how he feels about you saying, who cares what we call it? So are you actually celebrating it to him, or are you celebrating it to yourself? How are you going to call it something that has historically pagan roots? What do you mean, who cares what we call it? I care. He cares. And then same thing with Easter. Why are you celebrating Easter? Why aren't you calling it Passover? Why aren't you celebrating it according to what God has established? Well, who cares what we call it? God does, because he called it his Passover. And also when you're calling it Easter, you celebrate according to the way the world is celebrating this. It's a problem when pagans are picking up your practices, okay? That is not right. The whole world celebrates Easter and Christmas, and you're calling it holy? You think who cares what we call it? That's a heart issue. It grieves me so much. We are not to become part of the world. We are not to become conformed to the pattern of the world. We are to be a nation set apart and holy. And right now there's so much deception in the world that we need to be seeking the truth. What does God want from us? Who does he want us to become? It does matter. So please don't go trying to learn from someone who has no knowledge, who has no understanding. If they have not accepted Christ, if they do not profess Christ, and you profess that where? In your heart and then your mouth. Not the other way around. A lot of people who are doing that with their mouth, calling themselves Christians, and then other people get confused and they think oh, okay, they're a Christian. No, that is not the criteria by which you're a Christian. It's got to be coming from your heart. In fact, that was the context by which Paul said, you will be saved if you believe in your heart and profess with your mouth, not if you just profess with your mouth, but then you don't do any of the things. I mean, anybody can give lip service. We don't worship God with our lips. We worship God with our heart, in the truth, and in the spirit. If you're listening to someone who's wrong about something, they're wrong, do what this person did. If they think for 1 second that I might be wrong about this, or they want to understand, why is it that you're teaching this? Give them the opportunity. Go to them and say, why are you teaching this? Or where did you arrive at this? Give them the opportunity to be worth their salt. I'm not above questioning. I'm happy. I'm so happy that she's questioning me. And also she's doing it respectfully and with a genuine heart to want to understand. There's a difference between, some of the people who come on here just to accuse. There's a difference between that and questioning. All right. I hope that this cleared some things up. If, in fact, I had to go back through the video to correct that God's calendar has 354 days, not 360. And so if I made a mistake and I missed, one of the times that I said that, because you'll notice that it's really choppy as I was trying to correct that. If I missed it, I apologize. God's calendar is 354 days, which means there is an 11-day discrepancy between God's calendar and the Gregorian calendar. Not cool. That's going to throw some things off. That's quite a discrepancy, actually, and it's going to throw things off year to year. Okay, one very last thing that I want to say. If it feels better for you to maintain the date of May 15th, 2022 as Pentecost until God tells you otherwise, then do that. The reason I am looking at May 18th is because of what he did with me. But like I told you, I'm still discerning. So why would the days be off? Is that because of daylight being off or something like that? But see, this is where you really just got to discern it with God. You can't really make up your own thing. Stay with him. Certainly that year and the range of days is for sure telling us that Pentecost was within that time and that it is within the time of what we've discerned this year. As always, everything that I say, take it to God, discern it with him. He's the only one who can prove it to you in the special ways that he does. Thanks so much for listening.